Right, thank you. Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee. We're joined this evening, as well as members of this committee. I'll be inviting to the table chairs and vice chairs from other scrutiny committees who'll be joining us for the discussion on agenda item 5. We're also joined by the leader and deputy leader, who will be here to hear what we have to say about the scrutiny recommendations at item 5 ahead of a discussion at executive tomorrow. So welcome. We'll begin with some housekeeping. For members of the public who have joined us here in person, if you need to use the toilets, there at the rear of the room through that door, and to leave the building if you use the door on my right at the far end of the room. I've received 2 apologies for this evening's meeting. Councillor Eyre sent his apologies and is subbed by Councillor Vassey. Councillor Callum Taylor has sent his apologies and is substituted by Councillor Whitcroft. So welcome. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any interest in the matters on this evening's agenda not already on their register of interest? No. Thank you. Agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of January 2025. Do any members have any matters of accuracy from those minutes? Nope. So we're happy to approve those as an accurate record. Thank you. Agenda item 4, public participation. We have 2 registered speakers this evening, 1 in person and 1 joining us remotely. The first registered speaker is Gwen Swinburne. Gwen, if you'd like to join us at the table. No. You'll have 3 minutes to address us this evening, and please start in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Let me dive straight in. It's about the scrutiny review. The recommendations in the action plan do not address key elements in the report. In particular, I feel like a broken record. The report is clear. We know scrutiny can never work without a complete forward plan being submitted for the full year ahead. I note the officers have overlooked including this in their action plan. The statutory scrutiny officer should do this, if nothing else. The staffer proposal to savage scrutiny has no rationale. There should be 3 scrutiny committees covering people, place and corporate, with the corporate scrutiny committee being similar to now, but hopefully being far more attentive to governance and administrative oversight and failures in the corporate directorate. I would start with an immediate scrutiny of the HR practices to understand why so many senior officers are leaving and the bizarre salary levels, recruitment and performance management. The Chief Operating Officer is not immune from scrutiny, whatever he may tell you. I would propose that you do not need secret meetings every other month, but rather monthly all non-executive councillor briefings on topics to be directed by scrutiny chairs and vice chairs. No need to silo information like this. If there is a need for extra committees, they should be added. This will save staff time. To enable more considered approaches, I suggest that there is a new quarterly performance monitoring report to corporate scrutiny to be designed to properly oversight each directorate, and the place and people elements be additionally considered by those 2 scrutiny committees. This will go well beyond finance, which is reasonably covered to date. Additionally, in terms of the many strategies around the place, I would propose that a first job alongside the forward plan for the scrutiny officer would be to gather all the strategies in place, index and allocate them for regular update and progress review. This should be coordinated by corporate scrutiny, likewise a forward plan of major procurements, so we don't end up, as so often, with expensive extensions. The consultants were right to point out that scrutiny has oversight of much that you are told is being dealt with by A&G. It is imperative, in my view, that the corporate scrutiny steps in to address the long-standing, unlawful and opaque decision-making process and recording within the council. Finally, Chair, may I ask what happened to the rest of the peer review? It's gone very quiet. Thank you, Chair. I can send you this if you want.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments, which I'm sure we will cover when we get to that agenda item. Thank you. Our second speaker this evening joining us remotely is Flick Williams. Can you hear me, Flick?
Yes, good afternoon.
Thank you very much. 3 minutes, and please start in your own time.
There is no question that the scrutiny functions within this council need improvement. More training of members and the appointment of a scrutiny officer is to be welcomed. However, from reading this report, I'm not convinced that reducing the number of meetings achieves that. It feels more like cost saving at the expense of transparency. Has the regular appearance of cancelled in block capitals on the calendar of meetings been leading the way to this? What of public oversight? Scrutiny is not simply the preserve of members. Reducing the number of meetings with reports going to members in the interim removes the opportunity for members of the public to so easily follow council business and reduces the opportunity for citizens to share their own knowledge and expertise about which members may have no lived experience or familiarity. It is an opportunity to contribute to proposals or issues in a way that is visible and recorded, unlike completing consultations where considered contributions get reduced to a line on a spreadsheet. Those here arguing today for the public to have proper oversight of a council that works in their name will no doubt be seen by yourselves as the usual suspects. But there are many who take an active interest, unable or not interested in standing for elected office, whom I believe these measures will further exclude. I personally have learned an enormous amount from other members of the public who have spoken on a vast range of topics in public participation. Furthermore, it is then a matter of public record and allows for the keeping of receipts should they be needed later. Some of us believe that democracy is about rather more than showing up at a polling station or sending a postal ballot every 4 years. Indeed, I remember seeing a poster in the corridor the first time I ever came to speak at full council in the council chamber in 2010. It urged the public, get involved with your council, come to a session to learn about how to speak at meetings. Well, what a long way we have come since then, with successive governments less and less interested in what the public have to say. Scrutiny, by its very design, introduced to counter the opaqueness of a cabinet or executive system that prevents all from seeing how the sausages are made. As this administration keeps proudly proclaiming, council, the mayoral combined authority and both MPs now controlled by the same party, so the need for oversight never greater. And to make the point perfectly, what difference will any of your deliberations make today? The same item already on the agenda for executive tomorrow, less than 24 hours later, then speedily off to council to be rubber stamped a fortnight later. So much for pre-decision scrutiny. We do well to reflect on the precarity of democracy, recognising its fragility and dependence on active citizen engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Flick. And again, I'm sure members will want to pick up on some of the issues that you've raised when we come to have that discussion. But thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Okay, so that moves us on to agenda item 5, which is the review of the scrutiny function. So if I can ask Councillor Jane Burton and Councillor Clark, if you'd like to join us at the table, please. So just to explain our extended membership for this agenda item, we were keen for chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny committees who are not ordinarily members of this committee to be able to take part in this discussion, given their active interest in scrutiny in York, and you're very welcome for this agenda item. You can stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish, but that's I'll leave you to decide. Okay, so if I can ask Lindsay Tomlinson to briefly introduce the paper, and then we'll get stuck into discussion.
Thank you, Chair. As members are well aware, the Centre for Governance Scrutiny came in into the council last year, the back end of last year, to start the review. The first stage was an online survey that they sent out to all members, and then that was followed up by some in-person meetings, either individually with certain councillors or in groups. I think every member was offered the opportunity to take part in an interview in some way or another. Most were in person, a few were held by teams just because we couldn't get members into the building when Camilla, the lead reviewer, was here. Sometime in December, Camilla started pulling everything together, pulling all the evidence together, and formulating some draft recommendations, which she then came to members with in a series of briefings in January this year. So she ran a briefing for all scrutiny members and other non-executive members. And then she ran the similar briefing with executive members, I think, the week after that. And that was quickly followed by the formal draft report and draft recommendations, which were sent out to scrutiny chairs and to group leaders for their comments. Not much change in between the draft and the final, just some kind of tweaking of ordering of and emphasis on some of the recommendations. So the final recommendations are what are in front of you this evening. Just to help members kind of start the discussion on this, we pulled together as officers an action plan, which sets out each of the 12 recommendations and just some suggested potential ways that you might want to look at implementing those recommendations, if indeed that's what you wish to do. But the emphasis is that this is members' review. As officers, we are just offering some suggestions, and in doing that, we've looked at the Centre for Governance Scrutiny best practice reviews to look at what similar councils have in operation in terms of scrutiny. The report is on the agenda for executive tomorrow, and the comments that are made here by members will be reported to executive as a supplementary paper, and executive will consider them, and then the next step will be any recommendations from executive that are to do with constitutional matters, so the structure of the scrutiny committees, the format of those committees will need to be recommended to full council, and the plan is to take that to the 27th of March council meeting. Having said that, there are a lot of recommendations there which are not part of that process and are a much longer piece of work in terms of the working group and working up the protocols, the processes, the vision, the shared vision, and those procedures, and things like the forward plan and how that will fit in with scrutiny, and the executive work plan and the scrutiny work plan will form part of that much larger piece of work, which will hopefully be led by a dedicated scrutiny officer and other members of the Dem Services team. So I think, Chair, that's probably enough from me. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for the work that you and the Dem Services team, both to facilitate the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny review and to turn around the feedback and bring these proposals for us to discuss. I think in an ideal world we would have had a longer lead-in time for a discussion prior to executive, but we are where we are, and I'm keen that we take advantage of this opportunity to have this discussion so that executive members can consider ahead of their meeting tomorrow, and ultimately we'll come back to full council at the end of March, where quite rightly all members will have a say and have a vote. I suppose just by way of where I've come from in looking at this is when you read the CFSG report, from the discussions that Camilla and colleagues had with ourselves and colleagues who are not here today, Scrutiny had an effectiveness rating of 2.12 out of 5. So that's where I'm starting from, and hopefully where we're all starting from in terms of where we are now and where we want to be in terms of having a scrutiny function, whether you agree with scrutiny as a concept. And I know there are many who would prefer a different governance system, but we have the model that we have. And I'd like to think we all would like to make it as effective as it can be, and for members and for officers, and obviously for residents who, some of whom do actively engage in the scrutiny process, and more of whom we would like to be engaged. So that's certainly where I'm coming from, and hopefully where others coming from as well. What I propose we do is, starting on page 37 of the agenda pack, so that's the table that has 4 columns. So the action, which is the recommendation that CFSG have put forward, the proposal, which is the next step suggested by officers, and then an indication of who might be involved in that work and when. I'm less concerned about the who and when, more about the proposal column in terms of what could and should happen on the back of the CFSG recommendation. If members disagree violently with any of the actual CFSG recommendations, we can have that discussion as well. That's absolutely fine. It may be on some of the proposals there is a degree of consensus that doesn't require lots of discussion, in which case hopefully executive can take that as scrutiny being content with that proposal. There will be some proposals where there will be differing views, and it may be that as a committee we cannot come to a consensus view, but hopefully executive members will hear the discussion that's been had and listen to the comments that have been made in terms of coming to a decision tomorrow on a proposal that can then go forward to full council. But if we can provide a set of agreed consensus recommendations, then that would be good. But there's certainly no pressure on members to fall in line with that. Right. Without further ado, I'll go through each one and I suppose really ask members to indicate if there's an alternative suggestion they wish to put forward or strong disagreement. I'm not looking for members to say yes, they agree with the proposal, but it's really to tease out any sort of amendments we might like to make to the proposals that are set out. So the first proposal is to set up a working group to take forward the recommendation to develop a shared vision and understanding of scrutiny. Does anybody have a problem with that suggestion? No, this is excellent. Well, yes, but some of the details that we may start to get involved in as the discussion progresses, we may decide, well, that's a matter that the working group can pick up in terms of if we get bogged down in some of the detail of implementation, then I would see the purpose of that working group as being there to work through those implementation issues and to and try and form agreement. Councillor Rowley, and I'll bring Councillor Clark in.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's not necessarily on the action point, although I suppose if it's going to fall anywhere, it will fall in this one, and that's obviously the 2.12 rating of the effectiveness of our current scrutiny. I guess whatever we did in changing or restructuring or just looking at how we do scrutiny, we'll only know if it's effective, obviously, once. So will the same exercise be done again? So, you know, and then what happens if it's the? I'm just curious. It's easy to put a score to something, yeah, but what's it then weighed against, and how do we review that score in terms of our effectiveness? I'm just curious as to what the mechanism is for that.
I think it's a very good point. I think whatever changed arrangements we arrive at, I think an element of sort of evaluation of, again, it comes back to if we have a shared understanding of what good scrutiny should look like, whatever changes come into effect, if we then have an evaluation at a milestone that we don't need to set now, to take a view as to whether those changes have affected an improvement in terms of you know, better reflecting what good scrutiny should look like. But we need to do that piece of work first in terms of, do we all know what good scrutiny looks like? But no, it's a very good point, and we can make sure that evaluation is included in our recommendations. Councillor Clark and then Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. I guess it's to follow up that to some extent, the point I was going to make, and that's just As someone relatively new to scrutiny, and as vice chair, I think it's just the idea of being able to co-opt others into this. And I think if we're looking at good scrutiny and that kind of thing, that it is important that working group does have opportunities to co-opt to others and to really, you know, look at what scrutiny is and how, you know, what we can make of it. Really, it's just, that was my point, just to endorse that.
In terms of co-opting others, you're looking at sort of non-councillors.
I was thinking more in terms of whoever can help us, and I mean, I don't know where that, what others, and I guess that is another question. Who would those others be? I don't know whether Lindsay or officers has already thought about what that might be, or what that might look like.
Yeah.
We haven't given a huge amount of thought to it, Councillor. We did initially think for example, the chair and vice chair of audit and governance, because of the very close links. But it would be for the working group, I think, to look at who's the best people to co-op at any given point, depending on what subject matter is being looked at. So it's in the gift of members to decide how wide to spread that net.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of this recommendation 1 and the proposal and the actions, you asked if anybody had any objections. I would quite like us as a committee to not just put forward that, yeah, I don't have a problem with this, but actively supporting this. Sorry, slight difference. I think that it's quite clear from the report that scrutiny, we all know it needs doing better, and it needs a whole culture shift and a culture change and a whole change in mindset. And that's not going to be done by just one exec decision tomorrow. It's going to need to be an ongoing piece of work. And so I think establishing a working group to work on that is quite important. And I also agree with maybe co-opting other people from time to time, because I think there's probably very few of us who have ever experienced good scrutiny and really know exactly what it looks like. And I'm sure we all have ideas and thoughts on it, but there might be other people with expertise that we might want to have on that working group. And yes, I think it's right that it's scrutiny chairs and vice chairs and anyone else with an interest or expertise is on that working group, rather than it just being an executive decision on what scrutiny looks like.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the executive are who we're scrutinising, and so it should be scrutiny who decide how we do scrutiny. It seems like a conflict of interest for it to be just the exec. So personally, I fully support the proposals and recommendation 1, not raise objections to it.
No, that's yes. Yeah. It underplays the proposal if we say, well, go on then, and be sort of actively supportive. Thank you. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just start by saying my first experience of scrutiny, because I think it gives a context to this. In 2003, I was put on a scrutiny committee led by Councillor Merritt. And my instructions were to make sure that scrutiny can't get in the way of anything. And I say that because I think fundamentally, if scrutiny is going to work, we all have to be less defensive and actually see that at its best, scrutiny helps to improve decision-making. No one party is the fount of all knowledge, no one director, no particular group in the council. And what we seem to continuously stuff ourselves by is working on the assumption that anyone who wears a different rosette, if any of us wear them anymore, is somehow there to try and undermine things. Whereas in fact, the point of scrutiny, and I would suggest the point of us all around this table, is simply to try and help our city work better. And so if we're going to go through this business of creating a working group, my suspicion is we all know actually what the point of scrutiny is. We're just finding it incapable of delivering it. And so if we go down this route of having a working party, that's okay. But let's not see it as a vehicle for just delaying decisions again, because the decisions are not that difficult in truth. They're about us recognizing that at our best, all of us would be contributing to decision-making purposefully.
Thank you. Anybody else like to make any comments on proposal 1? Councillor Waller.
Thank you. Just going back to when scrutiny was being developed, there was the discussion nationally that this would enable local experts to be involved in that process. So when there was this discussion of co-opting people, I thought that was broader than just co-opting other councillors, because that's quite a limited pool when at the outset of scrutiny it was extolled as it would bring in experience from outside the council, and rather possibly jumping the gun, but to hark back to the old service committees, the times when it held the chair of that committee to account across party lines, because you had people who were had developed experience in a particular subject area, whether that was planning or transport or social services, and therefore there was this sense of a common good being applied, which was across party lines, and it's recapturing that. I'm not saying with rose-tinted glasses that everything was fantastic under that system, but it was an element of, it did ensure a level of pre-decision scrutiny that I think is not there anymore.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll bring you in a minute, Lindsay. I think there's a separate issue in terms of, in the course of this work the scrutiny does, bringing in partners. I think a productive meeting we had with Yorkshire Water came to an EPAT scrutiny meeting. So I think that's something that we need to sort of bake into our thinking in terms of how scrutiny operates. I think in terms of the working group, if there are people who, non-councillors, who can help us develop those arrangements to be the best that they can, then that's fine by me. Sorry, Lindsay.
Thank you, Jay. Exactly what I was going to say. So that opportunity to bring in external experts, that can be picked up in that task and finish group work, which is what the review is suggesting, where we shift the emphasis to the scrutiny being done at task and finish group level, which gives, I think, a much broader church of people being able to get involved with scrutiny externally, internally. Members who don't sit on scrutiny can get involved in task and finish groups in the way that they perhaps don't feel able to at the moment. So it's that aspect, absolutely. And in terms of the working group, absolutely. I think we're just conscious of the fact that, Councillor Bassey said he doesn't want to get bogged down and wants to make quick decisions. So we need to balance that against, how much time do we put into that? And I think some of those protocols and visions might need a little bit more time than others. Others will be a bit of quite a quick fix, quick hit. But I think that's something for the working group, if we are going down that route, to kind of set out the plan of work and to set out some timescales. So what it wants to look at, who it wants to bring in to look at that. So that, I think, will be the first piece of work that we do.
Thank you. Let's move on to proposal number 2, and this is the proposal that a dedicated, sorry, Councillor Merritt, sorry.
Are you going to take actually any votes?
I wasn't proposing to, unless there was an obvious lack of agreement.
And the second issue, as was touched on earlier, the proposal for a working group, it was suggested it be slightly widened. Yeah. And I think it's important that's recorded.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sorry, I'd taken that as sort of an agreed approach.
That's why I'm testing.
No, that's fine. So is everybody content where we've arrived at? Thank you. Super. Proposal number 2. Councillor, you're too quick off the mark, Councillor Rowley. So this is a proposal that the council employs a dedicated scrutiny officer. Councillor Rowley.
But thank you, Chair. I do have to leave for another meeting at 6:30, so that's why I'm trying to be in and as succinct as I can be. Just having chatted to colleagues, and I suppose this is one of the recommendations that I and my colleagues are slightly nervous about, really. To create a new post, and I understand that the proposal is to look at the current structure of democratic services and somehow maybe find. I know democratic services are pushed to the extent already, and as a council, we're very careful, quite rightly, in terms of our recruitment. I guess all I would simply say was if this particular recommendation goes forward, I would probably suggest that initially it was more of a trial rather than simply creating this post and giving them an MO, and and then in 6 months' time it's either not necessary or it can be incorporated into some other kind of role. So I guess that's our kind of comment and my hesitation around that particular proposal. So that was just my thoughts.
No, thank you, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, the interesting one on this for me is the word dedicated, and by experience across multiple sectors, the different places use that word differently. A lot of the time, dedicated means a person who just does that one thing and is just a scrutiny officer. In other situations, people use it to mean that there is one person who does scrutiny, but they do other things as well. So I guess for me, my caution around cost and finding someone that's already doing things, etc., is if you're having someone who's just doing scrutiny, that's better for scrutiny, but that is obviously going to cost more and reduce risk elsewhere. And what I can't tell from the paper is exactly what we're currently proposing. So I don't really have a strong opinion about it, but it'd be good to iron out what we're actually proposing with the word dedicated.
Any other comments? Councillor Vassy, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I, in earlier times, worked with a dedicated scrutiny officer. And the value that I attach to it is this. In-house staff, in-house officers who are dealing here all the time, when asked to look at a subject, the temptation is to look at what you're doing in-house and to simply produce a report about your performance over the past few months and to look at that and to rehearse that. Having someone dedicated to it enabled me, certainly chairing scrutiny committees back in whatever 2009, 10, things like that, to learn from best practice elsewhere. You had someone who actually had the time to compare what you're doing in York to what is being done in other places. And then at that period, you couldn't then just organise a meeting and have that person on a screen. You simply heard about them. Now, in the past 4 years with climate change scrutiny, we've certainly invited the head of finance from Southwark, people from Nestle's, people from places in York and other local authorities. Having that dedicated officer being able to make those contacts, do that research, bring in outside view of what's going on, I think would be instrumental in helping us become a little less insular in York. So I would very much support it.
Any other comments? Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I've also had the experience of working with proper scrutiny officers in the past, and absolutely echo what Christian said about how valuable they were in terms of taking that outside look, but also actually someone to chase the necessary information provision from officers in departments who often were quite reluctant, with, I think, some direction in the same way that you were directed, not to help scrutiny. You also have to acknowledge that officers at the other end have, their ordinary day jobs to deal with. So someone who can actually do a lot of the assembly work so that you have productive meetings, which is far beyond what democratic services do, is absolutely essential. I think in terms of Martin's and Jason's point, my concern is actually you're only recommending one officer. If you actually want to have a reasonable level of scrutiny, that is going to be quite a challenge, just having one officer. So I have absolutely no qualms about having a dedicated position. I think that is the absolute essential minimum if we are to effectively resource a decent level, a moderate level of scrutiny, effective scrutiny in this authority.
Thank you. I would, echo those comments in terms of this is a recommendation that's come from CFSG, who understand what the ingredients are for good scrutiny, and I've worked in as a scrutiny when we have had dedicated scrutiny officers, and it does enable and empower scrutiny. Yes, it requires members to be engaged, and a scrutiny officer shouldn't do the scrutiny for the members, and that's something that we should always kind of guard against. But in terms of enabling and facilitating, I personally think it's critical. Lindsay, do you want to pick up the point about dedicated?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Certainly, I would like a dedicated scrutiny officer who just supports scrutiny. I've been a little bit cautious about the wording around that one, just because it very much depends on some of the other decisions that are going to be made. So the number of scrutiny committees, the number of meetings, that would, if they are reducing, that will create capacity within the team to enable a dedicated scrutiny officer without there being an impact on support for the other committees. So my aim would be to have a dedicated scrutiny officer who just does scrutiny. And so at a meeting like this, you would have the scrutiny officer leading the meeting, and you would also have a governance officer taking the notes and doing that other admin to support the meeting. I've done both. I've been a dedicated scrutiny officer, and I've been the person doing the joint role. And the joint role is really difficult because it's hard to give scrutiny the time that it deserves if you're also doing the mechanics of running the meeting. So in an ideal world, yes, dedicated scrutiny officer, but it kind of partly dependent on how we go with some of the other recommendations too.
Okay, got a couple of indications, and then we'll move on from this item. Councillor Widdowson.
Just following on the last comment, can we be careful that this isn't seen that we've got to shoehorn in what we require for scrutiny for the resources that we've currently got? Because that isn't the way around. That isn't how we're supposed to be looking at this. So if we need, whether it's one dedicated, and what dedicated means, I've no idea, or whether it's 3, or whether it's whatever, let's not start getting into the detail of what exactly that is before the working committee has decided what it should look like. It just concerns me that that's where we've leapt to.
Yeah,
we can only have one, and because of the resources.
Yeah. Dedicated scrutiny resource is staff resource is another way to explain it. But I think we're hopefully we're clear what we expect. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Yeah, that gives me the answer that we're looking at 1 FTE for scrutiny, if you like. My follow-up question is, as things stand in your head, does that include support for task and finish groups and also for exec work plan stuff, or is that?
Yes, absolutely. It would include supporting, leading on a lot of the task and finish group work, but I think there's a lot of work we can do with officers from the departments that are going to be the subject of the task and finish work, so we can pull in additional resource from those other departments. What I want the scrutiny officer to do, and myself as SSO and the DEM service manager, once we recruited a DEM service manager, is to champion scrutiny by going around departmental management teams and talking to departments and directorates about scrutiny and about the support that they can give and how we can kind of work together. So yes, dedicated scrutiny officer leading on, coordinating task and finish groups, but I would be looking for support elsewhere across the authority and support from within democratic governance as well, because the DSOs will be supporting some of that work as well.
Okay, thank you, members. So I think with Councillor Rowley's caveat around sort of evaluation of whatever arrangements are put in place, which would apply to all of this, including the deployment of dedicated scrutiny staff resource. Can I take it that members are supportive of this recommendation? Yes, thank you. Okay, number 3, so the CFS. Councillor Healy,
indicating for when you want.
I'll introduce it first. Such keenness. recommendation 3 from CFSG was that we look to move towards a system where only named substitutes are able to fill in where a permanent member of the committee is not able to attend. This is something that we already have for this committee and for planning, and I think for A&G, although we do seek dispensation where even our named subs can't attend, so we have to push the net wider. I think this came out of feedback from the survey that perhaps some members were more engaged in the work of the scrutiny committees than others, and that perhaps by having a more kind of hardline approach to who can sub for whom would suddenly make all members more engaged. So I'd welcome comments on this. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the comments I made as part of this was that it can be difficult if you're a last minute sub to a committee you're not used to. Getting up to speed on something that has gone to that committee before can be difficult. And I think that's that sort of thing that's addressing. But I don't support this action in limiting it only to named subs. I think part of it's due to capacity. The capacity, hopefully, if depending on how everybody feels about the other actions here, becomes slightly less intense, and that means that there is more likelihood people can make meetings, can plan further ahead, and find people. But I think that limiting it to just named subs causes all sorts of other challenges, and it's good to make sure we have at least the right number of people to actually have that conversation personally.
Okay, right, Councillor Rowley, and then Councillor Coles, and then Councillor. Oh, yeah, I've forgotten about you, sorry. Councillor Healy.
The gold star.
I am glad I'm so memorable. Picking up Councillor Rose's comment, yes, totally disagree with this. Massively disagree with the fact that it would have to be overridden by the consent of the CRO, MO and HODG. We already have to do that to get access to privileged papers if you're not on the committee, which I massively disagree with as well. And picking up the point that Councillor Rose did make, yes, it can be difficult to get name substitutes. And actually, sometimes it's quite good, or I certainly find it is, to go on a committee that you almost don't know anything on, because then you ask what may be considered stupid questions, but actually can be quite revealing. So I don't accept this one at all. Big cross.
Understood. Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with both my colleagues, really. I guess the challenge for this recommendation is felt more with a smaller group. And for example, if you had an independent or a group of one that was on a scrutiny committee, how could you get a name substitute for them? So I think with this to go through, my other challenge would be around the dispensations. I mean, currently we have a system in place for this committee where dispensations can be granted when we can't get a named substitute. So I think you're just confusing the situation if you don't go down the proposed route of trying to get some kind of dispensation from anybody that that's got a title that can be put into just letters. So they're my kind of concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things to add to what's already been said. I think, firstly, it slightly depends on the size of a new committee, because if a committee is smaller, it would potentially be easier to have a named substitute situation. But I appreciate the points that have been made, and I think I broadly side with the kind of need for flexibility. And the reason I think I side with the need for better flexibility is because the point that hasn't been made yet is that actually for any councillors who are parents, if they suddenly have a family emergency, actually that might be a reason why they can't attend or can't attend as a named sub. And actually those kind of circumstances just require a level of flexibility. And if we want our councillor group to better reflect the community of the city, we just need arrangements in place that show that actually just because you happen to be a parent or have caring responsibilities or whatever it might be, actually that isn't going to predetermine your ability to take part in a committee.
Thank you. Add Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think you've got your consensus there. But as a substitute myself at this instance, I still think that it is, as Councillor Healy pointed out, a benefit when you can have a wider range of substitutes coming onto different committees. I think that's actually quite a good thing. Equally, if we did just have named subs, presumably there would be a clause for emergencies where the monitoring officer can sign on subs, which is the case for A&G, for example, audit and governance. That would just become a regularity. So we'd end up breaking out of this sort of constraint we put ourselves in the first place. No, completely agree with my fellow colleagues on this.
What I can hear is an emerging consensus in sticking with the arrangements we currently have, but let's keep going. I'll get everyone's views and I'll come back to Lindsay. Councillor Merritt.
Thank you. I think in practice, we will have to say no to this one for the reasons that have been given round the table. But I think it's worth just thinking about what this was trying to achieve, because you know, I sit on WICA Scrutiny, where we have name substitutes. I'm a name substitute for one of the external bodies, and they actually are trying to operate differently from what we're used to. And the name substitutes, in fact, at the outside body, are invited to attend, even if the main nominee isn't there, and ditto with the WICA Scrutiny. It's so that the name substitute, in effect, can have the involvement, but while sticking to the first person as the person who actually wields the vote, so that those people are fully engaged with the topics that are being discussed. If they do substitute, they are fully up to speed. And if we are trying to do real scrutiny where you're getting much further into the business, there is actually there's strong reasons for why that recommendation is made. But I think the reality of the nature of us as councillors, with work commitments, with family commitments and so on, is in practice we will have to keep the flexibility. Yeah. But as I say, I think it's also about a different way of working, which we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with the consensus, but I think it's right that the question is asked.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason the question is asked, I think, is scrutiny has become a bad gig, essentially. And as one who's chaired a number of committees over several years, one of the worst things that happens is when you sit down at the table and you know that there are people around who haven't even looked at the papers when they've sat down. And that matters because all those voices around the table are meant to be contributing. And so asking the question about whether anyone should be a substitute is another way of saying, how engaged are the people around the table? To what degree do we expect people to have read the papers and to be participating in good faith, rather than turning up in order to be quorate and that's that? It's not unique to York, and I've heard that there are places worse than York. I've heard of committees where people turn up and the papers are in envelopes and they sit down and open the envelopes at the table, which makes it perfectly clear that people are sitting down with no prior knowledge of what they're meant to be discussing. So in terms of this,
okay, understood.
Yes, I take on board what's been said, but there are reasons why it's there.
No, and yes, and a lot depends on the stake that members feel they have in the scrutiny process. Subs, name subs, other subs. It's got Councillor Jane Burton.
Yeah, I'm probably going off on a tangent here, but I'm also in favour of not having name subs for also reasons of illness. I'd hate to be coming into a committee where somebody had, say, COVID because they thought, well, I can't get a sub, and end up, catching COVID because it still is dangerous to some people.
Yeah.
So that would be also my reason, which is a bit obscure, I know.
No, it's very valid. Okay, so I think the consensus on that is our recommendation is that proposal number 3 is not pursued. Of course, yes.
Thank you. We, as officer, very deliberately didn't make comment on that. But I think having listened to the discussion, one of the things that we could perhaps look at with the working group, as well as Councillor Merritt's, the idea about name subs coming along to meetings, is also, I think a lot of this sits with the training. We have certain committees at the council where if you haven't done the training, you can't sit on the committee, so planning, licensing. Members might want to look at through the working group something similar. So if you've done the scrutiny training, you can sit on, and you'd have to be a named sub. So we can explore those options through the working group.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's move on to proposal. Councillor Rose.
It's a very tiny additional suggestion that we could be better in future scrutinies when there is an item on the agenda pointing back to the last time it came to the same scrutiny committee, so that someone can go and watch 7 minutes of a video to upskill on that particular thing if they know that it's been there before. Just a suggestion.
Yep, well, that's a good idea. Rather than leaving it to recollection, I'm sure we discussed that in whenever it was. Okay, thank you. Number 4. So this is a piece of work that's recommended to be taken forward by the working group, is to revisit and refresh the executive scrutiny protocol, including the establishment of regular structured meetings between scrutiny chairs, vice chairs, and executive members to discuss future mutual priorities. And this may be where the suggestion of the sort of the forward plan being central to those discussions in terms of identifying future opportunities for pre-decision scrutiny or for post-implementation review, which I am happy with. Does anyone else want to comment? Councillor Healy.
On the proposal, where it says discuss/agree, I'll delete agree and just leave it as discuss.
Okay. Councillor Benbert.
Yeah, thanks. Support it. I was just going to say, if it doesn't happen already, I think it's just important that senior directors attend those meetings as well, in some sense, for saying that element as well. It's not just a exec member, it's also a director level thing as well. So I think that's just worth adding.
Will people be supportive of senior managers being involved in those discussions as well? Yep, that makes sense. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is the place to talk about forward plan, and there's nothing explicit written in there. So it'd be good to add something. I think particularly if we haven't got to it yet, we slightly. I mean, number 6 is work plan, I suppose, as well. If we're reducing the number of meetings per year, then that gap grows bigger. The forward plan being relatively short does make it significantly more difficult to think about work plan when we get to that item on every scrutiny meeting. So something related to that would be useful. It sort of is both 5 and 6, I think, but
yeah, and we can we've captured that, so that can be the starting point for the working group in sort of defining the scope of those meetings and the availability of that plan. We can make sure that's captured. Councillor Widdowson.
Again, just a quick one. The working group are going to decide that, aren't they? We haven't decided around this room now that the number of meetings is going to decrease.
We're going to get onto that.
Okay, yeah, but we haven't decided it yet, have we?
Well, we're not the decision makers, but we haven't discussed it yet.
I just see us going to solutions rather than saying how we're going to get there.
I think this, regardless of how many committees we end up with and how many times they meet, I think this is a sensible suggestion regardless, in terms of supporting better work planning and discussing things that can serve a purpose. So, we haven't made any assumptions as yet about numbers of meetings. Well, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, in terms of the item that you picked up about the forward plan, I do wonder whether we shouldn't just make a separate recommendation in support of the CFGS proposal on that. I mean, it's quite fundamental knowing what's coming to, being able to identify what you wish to pre-scrutiny. And I know I happened to look at the forward plan while we were having the earlier discussions with the CFGS, And at that point, there were several forward items all relating to the budget. There were only 2 items on the work plan that didn't relate to the budget. And they were only sort of 1 month or 2 months ahead. I think actually we just need to support the CFGS recommendation on getting a decent forward work plan. You know, that's something fundamental.
Okay, I mean,
to making this work.
Maybe we can better express that through recommendation number 6. And I suppose it's amending the text in the first column to incorporate things from the CFSG report that we don't want to be overlooked. That talks about scrutiny work planning process, and then that will inform the work of the working group. Would you be happy with that?
As I say, I think that, you know, it's something that just needs to be got on with.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's disagreement on whether or not. It's just how we reflect it in here. Councillor Rose?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Can I just clarify, members? The first column in this is kind of the abridged version. You should read it as being the whole of the CFGS recommendation. So I've just included a summary of what they are. So we mean all of the CFGS recommendations for each of the 12. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's all in there, just make sure we know it's all in there.
Yeah.
Councillor Rose.
It's not related to this item and it is purely political, but I'm getting a sense Martin's about to leave, and it'd be good to get a whistle stop any other thoughts around the rest of the agenda from him, since he's the only person from that party at the table currently.
Anything else you'd like to tell us, Martin, that before you depart?
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair, for just allowing me to. The only other one that we'd got some thoughts about was the frequency of scrutiny committees, and if we're going to increase the number of task and finish groups. I've been a councillor for 6 years. I've been on this committee for 6 years. I've only ever had one task and finish group. And the reality is, for whatever reason, I think it was to do with budget cuts and redundancies, it never finished actually. So we did a lot of tasking, but we never got it finished. My worry is that the task and finish group, if they can then have to then wait for a scrutiny meeting to be able to give their recommendations, if we're reducing the number of scrutiny meetings. So that was my one concern. Okay. The rest of it we're kind of broadly okay with, but that was just something. So when you come to discuss recommendation 9, if you can just bear in mind our thoughts. Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, Chair, and I'm really sorry, guys, I do have to leave, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. Okay, so where were we? We were wrapping up agenda recommendation. Or are there any further comments on that? But I think we're supportive of the proposal there. Okay, number 5. So CFSG recommended that we take a more deliberate and planned approach to budget scrutiny throughout the year. Nothing like a discreet exit. Right, okay. So this is deliberate and planned approach to budget scrutiny, and the proposal is for the committees, however many there are, to develop proposals in consultation with the Chief Finance Officer, and I would probably say and executive member as well. We've got a starting point in terms of the discussion we had at this committee in November. I think it was November, prior to the 3rd phase of consultation on the budget proposals. So that was so we can look at the pros and cons of doing that and what else we want to do. We don't need to articulate it here, but I think what this is saying is we need to, in relatively short order, decide what role we think scrutiny should have in terms of budget development. That's how I kind of read it. And I say we have made a start, but this is just taking it on a next step. Councillor Rose and Councillor Widdowson.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think it's very good, fully support, and from a budget design perspective, I agree with that. I think the other aspect of the budget is, and we've got it on the agenda today, asking a bunch of questions about the pounds that have changed over the year so far. It's on every scrutiny, and there's sort of some conversations, but it varies per person, per committee, per whatever. And the CFO is, you know, usually present for those conversations already. So it'd be good to have something actually leaning into how should we, and it might just be clarity rather than any change. How should we be looking at those? You know, why is adult social care suddenly £2 million more expensive than it was 4 months ago? Kind of bits of the budget as well.
Yeah, the way I kind of see it is as well as looking ahead to the future year's budget, trying to find the best way to discuss current year performance and how that interacts with planning for future years. But I think that's, again, something that I would look to, for us to sit down with Chief Finance Officer and Executive Member to figure out how best we can do that and make best use of officer time, which I think is something that we need to be mindful of. Councillor Widdowson.
Yeah, just building on what you've just said, the governance guidance that the LGA puts out is that you should be doing that every quarter, so that you build the budget in all the time, looking forward, looking back at what's actually been achieved, and then looking forward at what's going to happen. So putting that in as a structure that you looked closely at what's happening to the money across the piece would be a really good thing. I also would be interested to understand where the strategies fit in this. So I know we've got reviews on, you know, 10-year strategies coming up, and it'd be, would you do those once a year? Would you do them every 5 years? I don't know. It'd be interesting to put that into the mix.
Yeah, I think the next one, number 6, about in terms of review and enhanced scrutiny work planning process. So it's being clear about do we review, you know, the climate change action plan in terms of delivery of that, and the various strategies that the council has. You know, improvement plan. It's being clear about what, you know, how we want to factor those in, rather than at the moment it's kind of quite ad hoc in terms of how we do it. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. This seems rather different to the way we've been operating. And so my feeling is that what would actually be helpful here is to have outside input, so we properly understood what best practice looks like elsewhere, rather than just sit there and try and make it up ourselves. So I think whichever group it is, working group, scrutiny committee, whatever it is that's going to look at this, I think actually hearing from 2 other places that do things differently and how it works would be helpful.
Yeah. Any other comments on item 5? No, but so we're supportive of that, the direction of travel set out here. Thank you. Number 6, so the CFSG recommendation was to review and enhance scrutiny work planning process, supporting a member-led work plan. And again, that's another topic for the working group to take forward. I know in the past we've talked about how best to identify what topics would benefit from a discussion of scrutiny. Obviously, if it's a request for pre-decision scrutiny, that answers that question. But for chairs and vice chairs, being clearer about whilst it's a member-led work plan, sort of scrutinising requests for agenda items and understanding what benefit will be gained from discussing that at a scrutiny topic, as opposed to having an information sharing discussion at a member briefing session, which we'll come on to a bit later. We don't need to define now how that would work, but I think having a more deliberative approach and a more commonly understood approach would, to my mind, be helpful speaking as a chair. Anyone like to comment on that? Are we're happy with the proposed recommendation? Wonderful, thank you. Yes,
it will be quick. as I see it at the moment, outside of scrutiny, there tends to be two ways that topics can sort of come into us. One that I've noticed recently that certainly didn't happen a decade ago is we're having council motions now that say, we want to talk, here's an issue, we want to do various things. Oh, and by the way, we want scrutiny to do that piece of work, which council motions do tend to be the most political thing that we do apart from call-ins. So that needs to sort of be factored in there somewhere. And also, if a member of the executive wants to sort of suggest a scrutiny idea, I've only ever been in opposition, and I've kind of got the view of, well, if you think this is something worth spending time on, you have much more power than we do as a scrutiny committee. So it's very difficult then to sort of pick a policy area that you as an executive member, you genuinely think, I don't have a personal / party view / officer view that I would want to then broaden out. And I haven't seen that in the time I've been here. So it's more sort of,
I think it
looking at the other ways that it comes into play.
Yeah, it comes back to that, you know, having a structured approach where scrutiny chairs and vice chairs meet with senior officers and executive members to have that discussion around, you know, an officer or executive member suggesting to a scrutiny committee, it'd be really helpful if you could do, you know, some task and finish work on a particular topic to help inform work that officers are doing or a future decision. So I think it's and yeah, sometimes suggestions do come from council motions, and maybe this will make us think carefully about when we're putting together council motions. You know, sometimes it can be, well, we can ask scrutiny to look at it. Well, if council approves it, that's what will happen invariably. But it's, again, if we better understand what we're trying to get out of scrutiny, I think it will help us all in terms of maybe not going to sort of default positions that we might have gone to previously. Okay, Councillor Kilbane.
Took you by surprise, Chair. I just wanted to say it might be an opportune moment to say that, and I understand where Councillor Healy's coming from, but given the very low rating that we've got for our scrutiny, what we're trying to address here is the 2.12 rating in terms of how good we think scrutiny is in your City York Council. Is that actually, we're not trying to streamline or think of a better way of doing what we already do. What we're saying is, what the report is saying is, we need to change the way that we do scrutiny, and I think that's what we're all trying to achieve. And so what that means is, and believe me, I'm not 100% in favour of this because I do quite like a bit of adversarial politics. However, what the scrutiny report is saying is that that's no good for us and it's no good for the city. And we need to change the way that we do so that we can produce the best for the city. So just on this, it kind of comes to the fore on this particular point. So now on this point, it's exactly that, Chair. It's exactly right. What needs sorting out here? What's a really difficult problem here that the city faces? And how can we get all the best brains working on it? You know, whoever that comes from, whether it's executive members of the public, wherever. So, I mean, I think I don't want us to drift into just trying to make what we currently do better. What we need to do is change what we currently do, I think. And I think that's what the report's saying.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to recommendation number 7. This is around undertaking policy development in the form of task and finish groups. Again, this all, obviously they're interlinked in terms of if we've got a work plan, we've discussed with officers, executive members, some of the issues on which scrutiny can add value. Some of those can be through a task and finish group approach, with a dedicated scrutiny staff resource to support that work. So that's obviously the theory's fine. It does require members to be motivated and willing to get involved in that work, but that's always been the case. So does anyone have any comments on that? So I've got Councillor Coles and then Councillor Widdowson.
Thanks, Chair. Just broadly, I think it's a sensible idea. I think it does, however, depend on how much support a scrutiny officer is then able to give to that work. So I think it is otherwise one of those things that will end up being dependent on councillors investing the time in those particular groups, which it will be dependent on anyway, but those groups will be easier for councillors to take part in meaningfully if there is sufficient support from an officer to do them. So probably there needs to be a caveat around how many of those there can be across different scrutiny committees in order that you don't suddenly have task and finish groups across every scrutiny committee happening at the same time, because that will just make it impossible for a scrutiny officer if there's only one of them. That was all. Thanks.
No, thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
Just building on your last point, Councillor Fenton, if councillors understand what the outcome is going to be and how they can have the influence on the outcome, I think that we would get much more engagement across the piece rather than when scrutiny is either sidelined or I think Councillor Rowley said he did a task group, but it never got to finish. Yeah. So, you know, once you've got those types of things in place and it's listened to, then I think that's how you would get people engaged.
Yeah, and it's been clear from the outset, and we do have a template we develop. So if you've got an idea for a task and finish group, the template help kind of fine tune, well, what's the aims and objectives and what would an outcome look like. So I think we've got some of the basics in place, but yeah, if you've got confidence it will make a difference, then you're more likely to volunteer. Councillor Jane Burton.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Well, having been part of a very successful task and finish group, I know that they take a tremendous amount of work and time, and a lot more than attending a scrutiny committee does. But I wonder how many there have been in the past year that have finished. Exactly, and that was a lot to do with your tremendous amount of work that you did, Councillor Fenton, although we did all attend the meetings. Yeah. And I just wonder and worry slightly that will that really happen? Because I think that the scrutiny committee as it stands is not perfect. I understand that, but I just wonder about the amount of time that people will have to give. And I also wonder about the accountability. Will they task groups be broadcast like this meeting is today? Because I do worry about the accountability side of this change in how we might operate.
Okay.
And that concerns me. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Because to be cross-party is really important as well to succeed.
I think you're right in terms of the sort of transparency angle. I know when we have had task and finish groups, that group does report publicly to the parent scrutiny committee. So there is the ability for other councillors and members of the public to see what you're doing. I think a lot of the work that task and finish groups do, it'd be very difficult to do that on webcast because you're having informal meetings but I think there's something around setting an expectation about regular reporting back to the parent committee, and I think we can try and embed that.
I could just
yes,
and I can see that, but with fewer scrutiny committees happening, is there going to be a bottleneck? That's all.
Yeah, no, it's
my observations.
It's a fair point. Councillor Rose.
Yes, I think we need to have experts on the task and finish groups in attendance like we do with regular committees. I think we need to have them finish. I don't mean that them ceasing to exist, but they need to have objectives they're working towards, and ideally kind of smart, object measurable outcomes. I think attendance should be formally tracked. I think they have to come to committee with proper updates. And I think that does tackle most of the public participation points around some of the issues with transparency concerns, the issues we've had in the past where some of them haven't even met, let alone completed what they were trying to do. So, but I think it is a very good thing to move towards areas of focus that work over time rather than one-off, one and done scrutiny that doesn't necessarily build improved plans. As long as we actually do meet, people do turn up, it does achieve stuff, and it is publicly transparent enough.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think out of this long list of proposed changes and recommendations, this is the one that potentially could have the biggest impact on making scrutiny be better and policies be better and outcomes and service delivery for, you know, the people who are here to represent to be better. But it's also the one that probably needs the biggest culture shift and attitude change and, you know, the biggest commitment from all of us constantly and ongoing. It's not one that can just be something we recommend today and the executive just decide that it be so and then it magically is. So I think this one does need to, the working group that we're recommending, possibly this is the one that really need to focus on how to design it in a way that means it actually works and does what we need it to do. And I think things like attendance, that sort of thing are probably going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and I think we can look at what works elsewhere. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And if we find an approach where it has secured member buy-in, then, you know, we can learn from best practice. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. There's a couple of people before me. No, I mean, I was just going to endorse what's been said, and I think the task and finish groups are kind of key to this new approach. I mean, I think it will develop, you know, potentially we could there'd be better decision making, and I think what's also key is that it does lead to policy development as well. I think just going back to one of the speakers, I think it's important that the task and finish groups are not seen as decision-making groups as well, and that we are being transparent, and that there are opportunities within the task and finish group that I think has been demonstrated. Previous ones, the one that you held about how public engagement can be an element of that, and it's important that is an element of that if you're bringing people in and things. And so, yeah, that was my real comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. Councillor Merritt.
It's on the transparency and accountability issue. Clearly, if you know a lot of the work is done effectively in private, there is, I think, a challenge here. But if it's in policy development, you know, on a number of policies, the council does go out to consultation. So if that is going to be the case in a particular area, then obviously I think that does cover that base. It may be in other areas where there isn't going to be a sort of major council consultation on something, then the task and finish group could perhaps look at whether they do a public session on their emerging proposals that does allow that public input and say, and a chance for in effect, to test out the recommendations and see if there are particular things that need more looking at. But, you know, I don't think we should be prescriptive. I think that's something that the working group that's looking at the new processes should perhaps take a look at in terms of, you know, just testing how we're going to make this work and how we do achieve that transparency and accountability.
Yeah, no, good points. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I note all the points that have been made around the table. I think, yes, this is a big opportunity. To make the most of it, I think we need to face up to the fact that I think one of the reasons scrutiny has become less functional is that it's perceived as contributing very little towards decision-making. So many times we're just reminded we're not a decision-making body in scrutiny. And in a sense, that just demolishes the pile of cards we're trying to build up. and we're invited to note reports. Well, great, another talking shop. I think for scrutiny to work better, there's got to be a relationship and an engagement between scrutiny and the administration of the day. And there has to be an undertaking on the part of scrutiny to do its homework. We have to be prepared to do the work, and that's why the working groups and the words like deep dive mean something. And I can say that some of the scrutiny committees that I've been involved with that have worked the best and had a dedicated scrutiny officer were ones where at the end of each meeting, the members were given homework to come back to the next meeting. And our commitment over time increased to the point where all the people around the table had a few things to say. They would come to the next meeting, share it to the rest of the members, and together we would learn. And we became a source of information that was of value to the administration as well as to the members around the table. So yes to deep dives, but let's accept that that requires responsibilities on all sides, from scrutiny members, from the administration, from us all trying to be more constructive going forwards.
Thank you, Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've only ever been involved in one task and finish group, which was in my towards the end of my second term back under the James Alexander, Labour coalition. And the premise of it was around behavioural change and measuring your outcomes. And it was around waste behavioural change. And it was in blocks of flats, how to increase their level of recycling. And the topic was with officers, okay, you've only got a limited sum of money, take two areas that are roughly the same and measure your effectiveness of your advertising campaign around recycle it. And so that was what we hung it off. We produced a report, and the outcome of it is you see a slight blip over a short period of time, and then it basically settles back to the norm. So in essence, that money had been spent and it had no even medium-term outcome. Wrote that up, took it to executive, presented it, and I don't know, Councillor Merritt, if you were on the committee at that point, Councillor Alexander was very, very negative about it. He says, well, you haven't recommended how to increase recycle it. And I said, well, no, that's not what this is here for. I'm demonstrating to you that your behavioural change activity has not worked. And if you carry on spending this money in the same way next year, it's not going to work. Backwards and forward a couple of times. Councillor Alexander, at the end of it, then turned to his executive member for environment and said, well, can I have this as a cut then? Because this is not worth money. Officers shut it down. Nothing changed. I stepped down the following year. Councillor Alexander stepped down the following year. So in terms of policy development, we actually had, from an opposition, the executive, particularly the leader, was brought on board of it. We didn't follow it up.
Yeah, and sure, we can all recall examples of where scrutiny hasn't worked, but we're hopefully looking forward in terms of how we can have a situation where everyone is on the same page in what to expect from scrutiny. So thank you. Councillor Coles, and we really must
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on the point that Councillor Vassie made about being constructive, and I broadly agree with that as a general point, but I think there was another point, and I don't know whether the head of democratic governance can just clarify. There is an issue here with ensuring that we're operating within the structures and democratic kind of just the way in which we make decisions in the council, because it's partly about the things that you're being asked to discuss at scrutiny, because obviously there's no point in bringing things to scrutiny if there isn't any point to the discussion. And I think that was the point you were trying to make. But equally, the place for scrutiny is that, and it's not to make the decisions, because we have an executive function in the council who make those decisions. So I think it probably depends on the way in which that the scrutiny process is working in the issues that are coming and the attitudes of the people who are sitting on those committees. But it is about both of those things, the issues that actually come to scrutiny and the way it happens within the construct of the actual decision-making structure that we have on the council, which is an executive run council.
Yes, scrutiny has a function, and hopefully this sets out a framework within which it can be as effective as it can be. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first I just want to say thank you to Claire and Pete for being here at a meeting for the whole of scrutiny to listen to what we're saying when they could have just got the papers of what we're recommending and read it tomorrow in 20 minutes. So there are pros and cons to that. I also think it's worth calling out that we had the Constitution Working Group. It gave some successes. We had the various licensing working groups that have created major documents. So there are lots of examples of successes. In terms of how we make sure things do work, the one thing that I didn't mention when I was looking at it is ownership of those task and finish groups, the role of chair, vice chair, how that changes when you might have fewer committees being chaired, but the responsibilities differ slightly, and also remuneration of chair, vice chair roles, etc. So there's some sort of stuff about this that's kind of been hinted at, but I think that should be a discussion by exec and probably after the fact, whatever's decided, something that's worth us talking about.
I think there are probably a number of discussions that follow on from wherever we get to in terms of role and chairs and vice chairs in a environment where there may be fewer committees, and in terms of oversight and empowerment of task and finish groups. So I think there's lots more to unpack that we won't cover this evening, but would need to be addressed so that everyone's clear about roles and responsibilities. Okay, let's move on to recommendation 8. So CFSG suggested we consider reducing the number of committees and possibly the number of councillors on those committees. Lindsay has put together a starter for 10. I don't think we've claimed it to be anything other than that in terms of potentially moving to a situation where we would have 2 scrutiny committees, one focusing on people services, one focusing on the current work of this committee, plus the place related aspects of the council's operation. And obviously underneath that you would have task and finish groups doing what task and finish groups will be empowered to do. On the off chance, does anyone have any thoughts about these proposals? Councillor Rose.
I mean, I think everyone does, so it's a surprising lack of hands. Thank you very much for putting together a starter for 10. I had a chat with a lot of different people about it, and I think every single person I've talked to has a different opinion, and we have one on public participation as well. So I don't have a particularly strong feeling about it. I think this too works as much as anything else. I think I personally lean towards 3, not necessarily the 3 that was suggested in public participation, but not necessarily not. Splitting by portfolio or similar makes sense to me. Equally, I've seen people suggest changing it so you've got one in charge of the doing and the kind of conversation around what should happen, and one in charge of the done in terms of the sort of measuring of it. There are lots of different ways of cutting it. I definitely support the drop to 2 or 3, but trying to get an action together and trying to get consensus on this, I don't really know how it would be possible.
Yeah, but I think at this stage it's kind of teasing out I suppose concerns people might have with any particular approach, or if there's a consensus around a change. And I think it's having an eye on, we're not just rearranging the way we do things, we want to do things differently and be more effective. And it's really difficult to say, well, if we have 3, that'll deliver a step change rather than 2, because I don't hand on heart know whether that would. It's trying to create the ingredients for successful scrutiny, and I don't have the answer in terms of number of committees, but obviously we want to get people's views. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll leave the structure to one side for a second and just talk about numbers. If I may, I appreciate there's the idea here that we'll have an 11-member committee and then a 9-member committee. We know that there's sort of a degree of variance across the council on how many members are in each committee. Audit and Governance, for example, has 7 elected members, although there is the addition of 2 independent members, which is an interesting thing to have on an Audit and Governance Committee, which I think is their statute as a statutory requirement, but could be a consideration as we move towards task and finish groups. Something to think about. I think there might be room for reducing in terms of the actual numbers of members of the committee. I just think 11 and 9, even though we've got sort of the larger numbers here, I think if we're going to, I think if perhaps this is a cultural shift and being aware of task and finish groups, something I've not been a member of before, which will of course be smaller. I think there might be a case of having 9 rather than 11 members. And I think in terms of having different sizes for these 2 committees might not align properly with consistency. I'd be very interested to hear what members' views are on sort of committee numbers. And I've worked with a number of members around here on Audit and Governance Committee, which is obviously smaller. I do broadly, I think there could be a reduction in the size of committees. I don't think we all necessarily need to be here. But yeah, that's my thought on that.
Yeah, something I've given a lot of thought to. I think going from 4 to 2 maybe would be too big a jump to make in one leap. If we went to 4 to 3, we'd then need to think about how the service areas would be spread around those 3 without, and because each area brings with it a different degree of sort of statutory reporting that comes to committees. There's more for people than place, for example. I would be supportive of having sort of a fewer members on committees. If Councillor Rowley were here, he may make the valid point that if we reduce them to a certain level, we then get into proportionality issues, and we do want scrutiny to be as representative and as broad a cross section of sort of councillor opinion. And if we go too small, then we risk excluding some members. Yeah, there's no immediately obvious basis for saying 3 rather than 2. Certainly, I'd kind of alighted at 3 as a sort of a next step, but again, subject to sort of evaluation. Councillor Rose.
I mean, the big argument for 3 over 2 is the sheer quantity of stuff that has to be managed by the committees. And if you've got your cadence sorted as roughly every other month, 3 can handle more than 2. I'm not saying that means that 3 is the right answer over 2. The challenge with dropping to 2 would be it would be quite hard after a couple of years to see whether it should go to 3 or 4. Whereas if you drop to 3, it's easy to see if it should go for 2 or 4. I think whatever we do, it'd be good to put in an 18-month or whatever the backstop is to say, specifically we want to ask this one question amongst everything else. Do we want to change it back to 3 or 2 or whatever it might be?
Yeah, and I think certainly in my mind, it's hard to unpick 8 from 9 in terms of the recommendations, because I think moving to, we talk a lot about scrutiny being on a kind of hamster wheel. We've got another committee coming up next month. We need to talk about something. Let's get an item on the agenda, without necessarily thinking it's kind of cart before horse. In my mind, at least, I struggle to kind of disconnect horses courses, whichever whatever you want to use. I find it hard to sort of disconnect the number of committees from the frequency. If there's something around better quality work, certainly where I'd got to is thinking, yes, have fewer scrutiny committees, maybe 3, meeting every other month rather than every month, to create the space for the sort of policy development work through properly resourced task and finish groups, for example. It's hard to look at them. I find it difficult to look at the recommendations in isolation, and I'm sure others have had similar thought processes. Yes. Right, I must get others' views. Councillor Merritt.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right to link 8 and 9, because there's workloads to manage, there's meetings, attendances to be able to make happen, given people's busy diaries with other things. There's the staffing resource side of it. If we are to make room for a reasonable, modest number of genuine task and finishes that do some real deep dives, that do policy development, then I think there's probably a strong argument to go to the 2. If we reduce the frequencies and we get separate briefings, then perhaps there's a bit more flexibility for two or 3. But I think there's some danger if we just go from 4 to 3 that we haven't really made the change in terms of what the ambition is here. But I know there's mixed views on the numbers. I think if we go to the halfway house of 3, we really do need to make sure we do a review within a reasonable period of time to see if we have got the change or not. So I think it needs to be, whatever we recommend, there needs to be a definite recommendation about a review after a reasonable implementation period. And that perhaps, given the council cycle, might be after at the end of the first year, so that we have a chance to try something else for the last year as a council.
Well, I would be supportive of that. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. I would be reluctant to go down to 2 committees. I think public speaker expressed it in terms of having 3 committees, one which would be people, one which would be place, and one which would be corporate. And if I've understood that correctly, that's 2 that are outward facing and 1 that's inward facing, and dealing with 2 very different things in terms of outward facing. That I can sort of get my head round. I'm very aware of the increasing burden that has taken place as we've reduced the numbers of scrutiny committees, and the difficulties in seriously engaging with the things that need to be engaged with. And I think there's a risk that you chop it down further and you're ending up trying to decide the whole thing on a meeting with less information than the executive will get, which is, I mean, it's entirely right, the executive should get the information it needs. But if we reduce things to just 2 committees, I would see that as a struggle. In terms of the number of people on those committees, I'd just bring to your attention the way the Climate Change Committee worked between 2019 and 23. We regularly had 20 to 40 members of the public at those meetings, as people who were there will recall. We seconded people from beyond the members to be at those committees, and I think it was fundamental to how it worked. So we had someone from the Wildlife Trusts, we seconded a young person from the Young People Climate Action Group to make sure they had a seat at the table. We persuaded Councillor Rowley to sit at the table as a non-voting member. So if we get down to those numbers of 9 people, there are ways of doing it that would make it possible, if we're not obsessed with voting at every occasion, to bring in more people. So that worries me less, in a sense, as long as we have that determination to bring in those other voices to participate. But I would be worried about taking it down to 2 committees.
Thank you. I'll add you to the list, Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm personally happy with the proposal for 2 committees. I just think the only thing for me is it's just going to require a big rethink in terms of the types of paper that come, which I know we've discussed already, but it could just be death by monitoring report, essentially, if we have the same level of monitoring reports. So we're only going to have 6 actual meetings a year. So basically, nearly every single one will have a monitoring report of some kind, and across place committee, that's going to be like 2 different. So it just requires a big rethink about what we do about monitoring and how that fits into the scrutiny process, or else there's just going to be lots of noting papers that come in. And how that works basically needs a whole rethink to fit within that 2 committee agenda. for me. But I don't have an issue with that. It's just a bit of thought, isn't it?
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
I actually think we need to be very careful in cutting out too many scrutiny committee meetings, because then if you just go down to 2, you've got so much to do in such a short space of time and so much to supposedly know about. I think it gets really, really difficult. What I would suggest is that we do a halfway house, which is 3, and that they meet every other month, and that you do have task and finish groups, and that you do have a forward plan. I think that's the most sensible, because then it's easier to then say, look, it's not working, we need more, go back to 4. Actually, there's not enough for these scrutiny committees to do, we'll go down to 2. But if you leap down to 2, I think it's very difficult to move back to 3 again.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you. Just a couple of also kind of practical questions. Just about things like if there was broadly, I agree with 3 rather than 2, because I just think it will shift it too far in one direction. Just around things like briefings, though, for example, is that something where there'd be scope to do those, for example, online rather than in person, so that saves a whole load of time? Would that also be something that then would be minuted? Or if it's a briefing about something for members, does that actually potentially save democracy officer time, because you don't need to minute it? It's actually just for members' information to be briefed on it and to ask questions without needing to be briefed for it to be minuted. I think that's a question, because I think sometimes the minutes become quite an important reference back for people. And then related to that, on the briefings, just whether or not that means that those briefings, if they were on something that wasn't a scrutiny, it was just a briefing or a regular update from senior officers or an exec member, does that mean that they could potentially be open to people beyond the members of the committee? And also that becomes just a wider thing, that therefore it's not just for the members of that committee. If you have a particular interest in a particular issue, you could just attend that briefing. So they were just kind of practical things, really. Yeah. But broadly, I think moving to 3 rather than down to 2 is probably sensible.
I'll ask Lindsay to come in on the briefing point.
Yeah, to my mind, the briefings would be all open to all members to attend. And yes, it would probably be helpful if we could run them online, and that would mean that we could record them. So what we're looking at doing as well, we've got a little group that are looking at member training and development and how we can grow that and make that better. And we're looking at the members portal on the internet and how we can develop that. My ambition is to get a library in there that we can put the briefings, the briefing notes, presentations, recordings in there, so members can access them whenever they want to have a look at them. So we're open to suggestions about how we can do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, just I forgot to say before, but the other thing that would be, it means that you can control the types of papers that then need to actually come to the scrutiny to be scrutinised, because actually I think, certainly my experience, I've been on both sides of this, is that there are a whole load of papers that were coming to scrutiny. It was unclear what the purpose of the scrutiny was. Actually, there needs to be a clear purpose to have something come to scrutiny, rather than just because someone thought it was probably a good idea to throw it through the process. Actually, that just takes a whole load of people, a whole load of time. So I just think making sure that there's a really clear purpose to those items that actually are coming to a scrutiny, especially if you've got less of them. Sorry.
Yeah, and that comes back to some of the earlier recommendations in terms of work planning and saying, well, that actually more of an issue for an all-member briefing to give us that flexibility. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this idea of having fewer committees that meet less often and have fewer members on them, I think is fine if the other changes and recommendations work. If the idea is that most of the scrutiny happens outside of scrutiny committee meetings and all members are involved in scrutiny through task and finish groups, then that's fine. But if those other changes don't work, then I think this would be very problematic. It would mean less scrutiny happening. This change really hinges on the other changes being effective.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it's very difficult to disentangle this from the other changes, because you say it will only work if those other things happen and are embedded. I've got Councillor Healy. And then Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit my initial thoughts would be 3, not 2. Again, less people. Given the fact there's 13 councillors on this committee, that's 1/4 of the entire councillor contingent sits on CS, CC, SMC. It would be really useful before the working group meets and actually decides on this, because I don't think the actual number is going to be decided tomorrow at exec, to create your sort of like year work plan and just put into it the things that have to go to a scrutiny. So the monitoring papers, and then just have a look and say, well, actually, 2 committees, you've taken up 80% of your time just looking at things you have to look at. That, and or it conversely, it may be actually it's only 1/3 of the time if you've got 2 committees, therefore you've got plenty of space. So something where it's a bit more, you know, let's take a view ahead and just ask yourself, does 2 work, does 3 work? And also, if you do have less people, picking up the earlier point where you have substitutes that are less knowledgeable, you're more likely to get people that then develop an expertise, particularly if the political groups can not just shuffle people around willy-nilly.
Okay, I've got 2 more hands, and I want to wrap up kind of 8 to 9 together and then take a break because everyone's been sitting very patiently for nearly 2 hours. Councillor Rose.
Fully support the points around training. I was going to raise it from an A&G perspective that we've talked about member training since the dawn of time. These information sessions I warmly back. I think they're a good opportunity for training as well as for asking questions and having more of a discussion. I think we could actually deal with 7 people from A&G. I don't think we really lose a huge amount by going smaller. So I think 9 feels like a really comfortable number on a committee. If we don't have the decision tomorrow on whether it's 2 or 3, then I back Paul's approach around actually looking at what would go in those and how much work that would take, and whether there's a better way, as Ben said, around how do we handle monitoring reports and what's the actual approach. The only other thing I wanted to add onto the corner of that as well is there's a risk here that the changes we're making in terms of fewer committees, fewer people means that there'll be more work on fewer shoulders amongst councillors as well. I think that's already a risk, and you know, in terms of committee attendance, you can balance that at the start of the year because you know what committees are going to exist. But if you're not sure what task and finish groups will pop up and disappear, it's quite hard to make sure there's a relatively level amount of work between councillors. So just, I don't think there's anything we can do about that, but just raising that as a concern.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Healy's, there was brief time that call-in committee was 23 members in, I think, 2002, due to proportionality being taken very, very, very literally. Made very interesting meetings. I think my question would relate to the business of those scrutiny meetings. Would they be led by the scrutiny members, or would the executive members in effect give their presentations and press conferences, which would take up a significant amount of the time when the amount of committee time is being reduced?
I think there's something around sort of work planning and making sure that members get the best value from the time they spend on those committees, and there is engagement with officers and with executive members to help inform policy development. So I think, yeah, this is now our opportunity to look at how scrutiny functions as a whole, with a view to actually delivering productive outcomes. Okay, I think in terms of, there've been a variety of views. There isn't a consensus around 2 committees, 3 committees, and that's fine. I think from what I've heard, there is a consensus around however many committees there are, not attempting to have monthly public meetings in order to create the space for the task and finish groups that we've discussed, and for the all member briefings that we've discussed, as a way of ensuring members are informed but without all of that having to come to scrutiny as a formal paper for us to note. So it's all about creating the capacity for scrutiny to be able to make an impact and be more effective. So that's my summing up of, I think, where we got to. Would anybody like to briefly add anything to that? Councillor Merritt.
The one thing you haven't picked up is the size of committees.
Yes.
I do get the sense that there's a general support for reducing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, sorry about that.
Okay.
Well spotted. Were you going to make the same point, Councillor? Okay. Yes, Lindsay.
Just to pick upon the point that Councillor Healy made about timing, and so the proposal is that we take the report to executive tomorrow, and then that executive potentially making a recommendation to council for the end of March about the change to the scrutiny structure, and that will be implemented at the annual meeting. Now, if members feel strongly that that shouldn't happen, then we need to have that discussion. But I think it's important to get started on this. The capacity within the team to allow us a dedicated scrutiny officer kind of is dependent on these recommendations, so we kind of risk delaying things if we're going to spend time looking at the structure. Absolutely, it's up for members to decide that and decide how quickly they want to do that. But I just need to kind of a word of caution that it will create a little bit of a blockage within the team in terms of capacity to be able to support that work going forward.
Okay, understood. I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to try and finish off 10, 11 and 12 on the assumption that they are hopefully relatively uncontroversial. Proposal 10, introduce a formal process to track recommendations that scrutiny makes. Seems good to me. Yeah. Do you disagree, Councillor Rose?
I agree with the action, except I question whether ModGov is good enough, but that's the only comment I wanted to make.
Okay, so I'll leave officers to consider whether that's the most appropriate mechanism. That seems really good. Reinstate the process of having an annual scrutiny report. Seems good. Hopefully means I then have to write one every quarter if we've got an annual one, but I'm happy to do that as well. People happy with reinstating an annual scrutiny report? Yep. And do you disagree with that?
No. Why did it become quarterly? Or has it always been quarterly?
Don't know and
don't care.
Really don't care. But the proposal is to reinstate it, so let's go with that. And number 12, a programme of ongoing training for members in undertaking good scrutiny, working with LGA, CFSG. There's lots of resources out there. Make sure members are aware of it and know how to access it in a way that suits them. We happy with that? Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. Councillor Merritt.
Yeah, as one of the public speakers said, there were a number of other detailed recommendations which aren't explicitly covered here. I think it would be helpful if the working group does take a look at all the other specific ones. I don't think we particularly agreed that earlier, but I'd like to suggest we do that as well.
Yeah, so we talked about evaluation. We talked about making sure that there aren't any CFSG recommendations that we haven't fully captured and taken into account. Okay. Yes. Councillor Rose, is this
It's a very small point that public participation, we've covered pretty much everything they said, but there was a flurry of things above and beyond what we've talked about and that's in here. It'd be good to capture that in the notes of this agenda item so that it goes to executive with everything else, if that's possible. I think we haven't got time for discussion on all those points, but
yeah. Okay, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Councillor Fenton. I'd like to thank you for all the time and effort and thought that you've put into coordinating this discussion and also the review. I think it's very timely. It's about time that we did something, and it's been really helpful and interesting to listen to what members' viewpoints are on this. And just for everybody's information, there will be a written record of your viewpoints that will come through to executive, I'm hoping, in the morning, so that can be reviewed in relation to the meeting tomorrow evening, and we'll take on board your views and comments. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to listen, and thank you to Councillor Clark and Councillor Jane Burton for joining us and for participating. So we'll take a break at this point, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you, members. So we'll continue with the agenda, and we now have agenda item 6, finance and performance Q3 monitor, for which we're joined by Debbie Mitchell and Ian Cunningham. Thank you for your patience. Obviously, you can take the report as read. Are there any introductory remarks you would like to make?
No, it's broadly as per Q2. Really, there's not been that much change. We are still forecasting an overspend. It is a much improved position from where we were last year, but there is still an overspend. So we are still acutely aware of that and continuing with our cost control measures.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I can ask members if they have any questions I'd like to raise, and I would ask we focus on paragraph 17 to 32, which cover the remit of this committee, which is obviously why we're receiving this report. Any comments or questions from members? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out some good numbers in there. Para 23, it lists the nitrous dioxide's direct and travel as flat, but it is down, and then paragraphs 24 and 25 saying how big a drop it is, significantly better than target. I think is really good. I guess calling out, and there's not really, I think, much of a question here, but the carbon emissions obviously going up because we're comparing 21 to 20, and 2022 data isn't here yet. We know that's a problem every time, but that's presumably because of COVID and COVID alone. The numbers are trending downwards. And then the only other one in those pages is para 27, the table at the top of page 48, just calling out the 4 C's percentage responded to, going from 74% to 92% is a huge improvement. It's in the context of some other stuff that we'll get into in the numbers grid, but I just wanted to say that's a really big win, I think, to get to 92% in the space of a quarter.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from members? Councillor Widdowson and then Councillor Healy.
I've just had a couple of questions. The table on page 44, does that include the 600,000 cut to libraries? Is that in there?
No, because libraries is under communities and housing, not part of top.
Oh, right, okay. I thought it was under the housing and community, so it is in there then. The table I've got says housing and communities.
Page 40. Oh, sorry, I was on page 45. I do apologise, Councillor Widdowson. I was on the table below. Sorry,
we're starting to think I was seeing double.
Sorry, no, you're not. So yes, in the financial analysis, the corporate council-wide financial analysis. Sorry, I was looking at the part for this committee. So across the council, yes, that will include the net budget will have been reduced by the saving that was approved by full council on libraries.
Okay, and does this table also include the 4.2 million that's been from the extended producer responsibility for waste?
No, because that's 25-26, not 24-25.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. One's more presentational issue and one's more of a bit of background. It might be more helpful, which you probably can't do. Our actual overspend 4.3 million, whereas the paper always refers to this sort of slightly lower 2.6. And I'm guessing from a financial / council's financial health point of view, you'd actually rather close to 4.3 as opposed to using these one-offs. So that's more of a presentational issue. The second issue, more on the medium-term financial forecast. Could you just give some background around this send money that's currently off budget that comes onto budget and how that's going to affect what's going to happen next year? Does it affect us if we plan for it, etc., etc.?
I think you're talking about the statutory override.
That's the one.
Yeah, that will be a decision made nationally. Every single council is in the same. So, sorry, I'll go back a bit. I'm not sure, Chair, whether you want me to go through this because it's
not strictly within
it's not.
the scope of this committee, but a brief answer for Councillor Healy's benefit, please.
So the at the moment, you may or may not be aware that Send expenditure is dealt with through the DSG, the Dedicated Schools Grant, and therefore sits outside of the general fund. So when there is a deficit on that high needs block, so the money that we spend on high needs SEND, that is not charged to the general fund bottom line because there is in place something called the statutory override, which allows it to not be charged to the general fund. And that's not a local decision, that's a national SIPFA and accounting and government decision. The statutory override was originally only in place for a particular period of time, and there is understandably debate ongoing around with government and SIPFA about whether that statutory override should continue. It's my belief that it will continue, because were it not to continue, I think 80% of councils would potentially be issuing Section 114, because the deficit on the high needs block would have to be charged to the general fund bottom line, which means you would have to cover the cost in year, and therefore your budget wouldn't balance. So you wouldn't be able to set a balanced budget. So it's a kind of national issue. I haven't actually got the numbers to hand because I wasn't expecting to talk about it because I was thinking about corporate services. But I would imagine that the relevant scrutiny committee will have looked at that. We are part of a safety valve programme, which means we've had 17 million of government funding to reduce our high needs deficit, and we expect to be balanced. Not next year, but possibly the year after. And therefore, if the statutory override were to be removed, I would hope that it wouldn't have too much impact on us because we wouldn't have a deficit, but I can't guarantee that at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my comments are really about the indicators that are included in the report. I only ever really appear here as a substitute. And every time I find myself commenting on the fact that there are so few benchmarks in these figures. So there are, I think, 11 different indicators here. 90% of them have no benchmarks. And it just makes it incredibly difficult to have any idea of where the council's going. The one benchmark there is of any significance shows why it's so important to me. On paragraph 21, the increasing supply of affordable housing, we've got percentage of dwellings with energy ratings A to C. And we get a figure that Q2 was 45.3%, and then latest data 45.6%. And that's described as good. And in one sense, I get it. But then it's also next to the benchmark that shows that nationally, we've got 59.7%, and regionally, we've got 56.3%. York is way behind on regional benchmarks and national benchmarks. So, first of all, that seeing the green arrow saying it's good seems to not really show us where we are. But more importantly, it is useful to have those benchmarks on national and regional because it gives us context. And I just wonder if you can help me understand how we're going to get to a point where we get a sense of a set of figures coming to these meetings that are all benchmarked so that we can properly contextualize York in its regional and national context.
Ian, would you like to respond to that?
Would I like to? So, yes, there's two things there. One is about the direction of travel that's there. And I think it's quite clear in the document, the direction of travel is around the specific indicator itself rather than its comparison to the benchmark. So there might be a conversation there about whether or not we could have another direction of travel indicator or a comparable against benchmark indicator. The second one is about benchmarks availability. I mean, across the board, if there are benchmarks, if there are government products, if there are things that are available to the council, are put within reports. If I look at the specific table here for corporate services, quite a few of the indicators are local indicators that we agreed that we wanted to set up. So therefore, things like the talk about panel and excellence in customer service, we're not going to have benchmarks available for them. So as an authority, we have information that comes through from things like APSI and Housemark and SIPFA and all the other bodies, and we try and add those to the report where they're available. It just happens here, Councillor Vassy, that we have a couple of indicators that we don't have benchmarks for and probably never will do.
I will, as before, go away and try and pick some of these up, see if there are any available, but I'm not sure we'll find too many more in this area.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
Just, and thank you for that, but when I see figures on maximum annual nitrogen dioxide concentration in the city or carbon emissions across the city, it seems to me, that's in paragraph 23, there have to be national and regional comparators or comparators with similar cities to ourselves, similar in size, similar in location. There has to be data that could help to inform us and give us context. So I hope that future reports, and I understand what you're saying, but I think it would be helpful to us to get more data here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is probably for Ian. It's just again about the data. There are just a couple of things. There's an awful lot of, you know, yellow sideways arrows, which obviously is basically fine, but within those numbers, the parameters, I was just interested in what the parameters are for making it yellow. I don't know if this is something that has been asked of this committee before, but for example, it feels to me like the difference between having your call answered in a minute and 5 seconds compared to 25 seconds, actually that's quite significant for a phone call. If that was the 999 control centre, that would be a significant change in getting that answered within kind of 30 seconds faster than we were a year ago. That's really good from where I'm looking. I just wondered what the parameter was to measure that. And then, but then for some of the other ones, for example, around satisfactory and good and excellent experiences, again, there are kind of tips in percentages, and I get that you, it's just understand what your margin is and at what point the tipping of what is looks like 2% or less becomes green or red from yellow, and at what point do you look further than 1 year behind and realize that actually we've done really well because we've done 2% twice, and so that's significant rather than just 2% in 1 year. Sorry if that's a nerdy question.
Ian, if I get a nerdy answer, come back the other way. So I'm not sure that I'm not sure for this there's ever an easy answer. Okay, I'm not sure there's ever a cut and fast rule. So in order to do the directions of travel, we do the last 3 data points. And what you see within the scorecards in front of you are quarterly data. So we have to find some way of presenting it. With quite a lot of these indicators, there is daily, weekly, monthly information that sits underneath. So there's a mathematical formula each time that's trying to look over those 3 data points. Now we have to do a mathematical formula because we have literally tens of thousands of indicators. Now they might not all be the ones that we see in public, but obviously behind the scenes, the way that we would look at any of our indicators through looking at people or looking through the geography, there's going to be lots and lots of data that sits there. So we have an automated procedure that looks at the last 3 data points. People do always ask me, can we have a look into that one? And I will go away and I'll have a look at the one around the customer centre, because we have had generally consistent patterns, and we know that when we had the garden waste calls last year, that really changed the pattern, and so we end up having some very unequal graphs. So I think if people are concerned about any of those directions of travel, maybe to let me know, we'll have a look into them. We'll update them within the scorecards and open data if we think they need to go in a different direction. But I can assure you there is a mathematical formula behind. And you asked, has the committee heard before? I think I sent something around the committee around about a year or so ago that broke it down with the mathematics behind it.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the average sickness days data. In the report, it has just the average number of sickness days per full-time equivalent. Do you look more closely at that data than just a kind of crude average, but just haven't included it here?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an awful lot of sickness data that is made behind the scenes, available to a corporate management team, but also to managers. We have systems in place which allows us to almost look at daily sickness, numbers of people off, different types of sickness, how long people are off for, people off for more than 30 days.
We try and combine that sickness data with the other performance data in the department, things that we know about the establishment and staffing, just to make sure that we give as much support to that as we can. I think you're right to notice that sickness has slightly crept back up and it's pulling away a little bit from our average.
I'm just thinking in terms of performance and us getting, you know, an idea of performance in terms of sickness days. I was just thinking that, so for example, if there was something to celebrate in terms of the council had reduced the number of people who were off long-term due to mental health issues, for example, because extra support has been provided, but that happened at the same time as a particularly infectious flu strain, for example, that could just, they could average out at no change and we wouldn't be able to actually see the details of performance.
I think that's a fair comment, and next time we bring this report in the sickness section, I'll expand it out with some of the other stories. There's other good examples, such as the number of employees that don't take any time off sick at all, which I think is almost 90% within the authority over the course of the year. So there are some really good news stories within there, but your first question about kind of monitoring the challenges internally, absolutely doing that to make sure we support people within the workplace as best as we can.
Yeah, because in terms of improving performance or even us getting an idea of performance, it's difficult to do that just from a one number as an average.
Yeah, no, that kind of level of detail would be really helpful, Ian. Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
You're always going to be asked different questions on different points of data, and I know that you've got a huge bank of them that you and I have poured over endlessly. So I know all the different details there. In terms of benchmarking, just building on what Councillor Vassie said, I was shown LG Inform earlier last week. Would it be useful to put any of those numbers against it? Because you can do it either by, when I was going through, you can do it by either the type of authority or something that's very similar. They did have an acronym for it and I've forgotten it. So just wondered if that might be worth looking at or showing people how everyone can get into that data.
So 2 questions in there. So the first one is, do we already use LG Inform? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that comes mainly out of the statutory returns that are done to government in whatever service or business area. And then we get back statistical regional neighbours. And those actually fill into most of the indicators that we have, especially when you get into adults, children's and the place world. There are less in the corporate world. And then the second question there was, could we let people know how to use LG Inform? Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's 2 or 3 things which are available to the authority and available to residents, which allow you to do various types of benchmarking, various types of financial analysis. So I think probably the solution to that is maybe putting up a bit of an overview, a couple of pages. Maybe we'll put it on the open data platform and linked on the performance part of the council website, and we'll send that around the committee. So yeah, sensible to do.
Well, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Councillor Merritt. Let's move to the annex.
Yes, okay. Could I just echo Jason's earlier comment about a number of really positive improvements and express appreciation to staff and the managers who've helped to get those things improving. However, on page 53, OCC 06B, number of days taken to process housing benefit new claims and change events. Something has not gone in the right direction on these, and I wondered if I could understand what's behind this and hopefully hear what might be done to get back to where we were.
Yeah, this is a DWP performance, not the council's performance. DWP performance, not council performance.
Yeah, I think we've had this one's come up before where it's not us, it's outside our control. We just report it. But obviously, it has an impact on citizens. But
yeah, so we did have a few minutes on this one of the scrutiny committees before, and it's just to think about how our revenues and benefits services into that back and forth and capacity in the system.
I think it was something discussed. I think I said something around after the last committee, and it's whether or not it's something you wanted to look at in a bit more detail and put on your work plan. And it didn't come back at that stage, but I feel it might come back again at some point.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, quickly on the point around the trend lines, the average speed of answer of phones was 13 seconds last year and then 1 minute 40 the year before, and is now going down from 105 to 24 seconds. I mean, it's worth us deep diving into that at some point, because I was staggered when it came through at 13 seconds from any industry role I've ever had with call centres or service desks. That was amazing, and it seems suspicious. And the fact that we've recoiled so much, we need to be able to find a way of getting that to a more consistent number. But one of the positive comments to make, red and amber rated large projects went down from 12 to 8. So I think huge kudos on that. It's been a complex situation for a long time, and it shows we've got quite a few of those large projects going green in a very short space of time within the 1 quarter. So just wanted to call that as a positive. And then one question on the end of page 54, in the middle of the information governance section, FO IO5, data protection subject access requests. We've gone from 48 to 94 in 1 quarter, which means that quarter had more than half of any previous year in 1 quarter. I just wanted to get an understanding of, if you happen to know, why we've suddenly had double in 1 quarter than we've had seemingly in any previous quarter, or whether that's an annual trend that actually this quarter usually does have more. It just so happens to be bigger in general this year, or
I'm not sure it's had a hugely amount more. It's a year-to-date figure. FOI05. It's got YTD within the brackets for the
that answers my question. I hadn't spotted YTD. Sorry,
it's the same amount in both quarters, thankfully.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Oh, mystery solved. Any further questions from members on the report? If not, thank you, Ian and Teppy. We'll see you again soon. Brings us on to agenda item 7, council motions. So members will be aware we received this report intermittently. The last time we received this report, there were a number of gaps and omissions. So this report has come back, and I'd like to thank Jane and Democracy Officer colleagues for chasing updates from colleagues in service areas with, I think, largely with success. There remains some gaps. So the purpose of us receiving this report is so we're aware of the status of those motions, and to flag up any for which we have concerns in terms of where the actions are, either a complete absence of any idea as to what action has been taken, or any observations, comments, concerns, which can be fed back to colleagues in service areas. So I'll start with Councillor Healy.
Page 104, Dignity in Retirement, Council Meeting 19th of the 9th, 24. 19th of the 9th, 24 is almost 6 months ago. And a letter to our 2 MPs is still in progress. I would suggest that's either incorrect as a status update, or that's just really not good enough. Another motion on the same council meeting, reforming residents' priority parking in York. Discussions are ongoing. That's one of Councillor Whitcroft's. I was wondering if Councillor Whitcroft had any further information, because again, that seems to be dragging on a bit.
I'm sure he'll be happy to respond. But so on the first point, in terms of letters, and this is something that crops up throughout, and some of them are so historic, I think we should really close them. In terms of 2022, it was resolved to send a letter. The letter never got sent. The people who put those motions forward, they're not here. I think what we need to be better at it's been clear where responsibility sits for writing, sending letters, getting letters signed off. And I think where we've arrived at is sort of the group political assistants having responsibility to take that forward rather than democracy officers. Because if that has been, that seems sensible to me in terms of representatives from the respective groups to coordinate and make sure that happens. And if it doesn't, then we need to take ownership of that, I would argue. But that would just keep cropping up. And the second point around the parking.
So what's the action we're going to take on that one?
Well,
Wasn't clear.
If it hasn't happened, if there's a letter outstanding, it's an action for the political assistants for the respective groups to do what needs to be done to.
But we're going to nudge them, are we?
Yes.
Yes. Just to clarify, we're in a little bit of a state of transition here where this has been held by the corporate support team and like CMT, we're doing regular reviews. It's come to our team to own the motion tracker. We're going to, the risk of Councillor Rose make comment, we're going to put it on modern.gov and using modern.gov to do the motion tracking, which will give a more robust method of tracking. Now, how we actually get those actions chased, I think there's a role for CMT. But certainly I think there's a role for the group, the political assistants to kind of do that nudging, but we need all the relevant directors and CMT members involved in that chasing as well. So yes, our team can do the mechanics of it in terms of putting it on there and then sending out the chasers, but we need to have some ownership as well from the groups, but also from CMT members.
Yeah,
we're developing that proposal anyway.
And I'll let Councillor Whitcroft respond to the parking issue, other than to say, I believe it's on EPAT's work plan going forward, but Councillor Whitcroft.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Chair. I think that sort of you've got motions that are kind of statements of intent, which are generally the letter writing ones. And I've agreed with what you say there. There are also motions where it's almost a direction. So I think in the case of this specific, just using it as an example, I guess what it asked for was a citywide review of residents' parking, something I'm very passionate about. It going to EPAT scrutiny, we've obviously reviewed the scrutiny earlier today, so if it still is EPAT, hopefully it will be. But if it goes to EPAT, it'll be something that we can then implement as a committee and look at implementing as a committee. However, fact of the matter is we've got a strong leadership model as a council. We've got an executive member for transport. I would be far more keen from the perspective of sort of a non-executive member that if a councillor were to pass a motion related to housing or introduce a motion related to housing or transport, whatever it is, I would like there to be an assigned executive member if it is sort of a directive motion. Rather than it being an instant, and I'm saying this, I've done motions that are essentially statements of intent where we've written a letter, we've declared something as a council, which is obviously something you can do. But if we're going to have a proper functioning, like backbench always sounds like a bit of a grandiose term. That's essentially what we are, though. If you're not in an executive position, motions are one of the few things we've got as actual power, and it's also one of the things we can debate as an entire council together. So yeah, I would like us to look a bit more in depth as a scrutiny committee. I'm a substitute member here, but I'm speaking as a member of EPAT as well. If we could potentially have assigned executive members or assigned people with the real power that they can use to implement these kind of things, because yeah, my parking motion is one I particularly want to see brought to life.
Yeah. Okay, I'm conscious that we try and stick to the subject matter rather than go slightly off piste, and I do have a list of hands. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, there's a couple of bits really, but mainly a note of thanks to say it's a really good report. I'm pleased that the committee's getting it. I've been critical in the past and of the gaps that appeared in the last time I think it came to this committee, and they've been filled and left me pleased to read it. So thank you. I would say though, reading through it, and there are a number of examples, and I'll just do one. And sometimes it's about the actual wording of the motion been not cast iron enough. So members take note of that, I guess, because therefore then it becomes quite easy for officers or whoever's tasked with the responsibility to complete the actions, complete them in not the true spirit of the motion. So I think there are a number of examples of that, and I guess that's just worth noting at this stage. I don't have a big problem with it because I'd expect people to follow that up where they've got the interest from leading the motion, etc. But on page 100, the example I'll give is about ending disenfranchisement in elections. Council has requested that government, it makes representation to the government to scrap voter ID, but that's not been an action that's been taken, yet the status is complete. So I think it's because in the actions taken, it says that it's been overtaken by events, but that request from council hasn't been overtaken by events. So that's one example. There are a number of others, and as I say, I'll leave it to others to pursue those matters. The key point is it's published in these papers, so members and the public can see and challenge where necessary.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to and I think it's the whole, right to the minister, right to whoever, where in the past that there hasn't been sufficient ownership of that action from ourselves as the people who put the motions forward. So we do need to be better at that to make sure that things don't just, oh yeah, we've forgotten about that motion. Oh, didn't we agree to do X, Y, Z? And time moves on, but some of them are still pertinent. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I've got a fair few, but I'll chip away at them very quickly. Letters, it'd be good to get an action off the back of that as and when there is a list of outstanding letters, who needs to write them and who has the action getting the complete of his political assistant, which party it is. I mean, probably it's going to be the leadership in most cases. It would be good to get that circulated to this committee so that we can see what's outstanding. Picking two early examples, sort of 2022, 23. There's an unfinished action to write a letter about Haxby Station. There's an unfinished one around climate action bill, which has been superseded by many other events, but then has come back round to a current ongoing climate bill. I agree that they either need to be killed or written, and I do agree with Paul's point that it's the one action of all the actions we get in these that should be done in a week, and I don't understand how we could be 6 months or 5 years later with them unfinished. So it'd be good to tackle those. Down the rest of the list, page 71, there's a chunk of stuff around disability implementation, social model, etc. It'd be good to get an update circulated on that. We have some updates on some things, but we haven't really had a look at it since there's been better training and some stuff in there. But I think we need an update on the motion specifically in the context in there. Page 73, there's a bit about customer services, abusive calls mentioned in the list of actions. And I was trying to think back if I've seen a number on any of the various committees I've been on for the total number of abusive calls per month or quarter. I don't recall seeing that number over time, but it'd be good to know if it's 0 to 1 to 2, or if it's 30 to 40 a day. Where do we sit and how is that tracking over time? It probably exists somewhere in our numbers database online with all the other data, but I haven't spotted it. Page 81, we've got the highway maintenance chunk of things in there, but most of them seem, in my mind, to have been tackled by the new rating approach, which is looking at changing some of the balance of things. So I think that will complete those actions and can close that off. Page 83 has an action for scrutiny on it, if I find that. It's the city response to food insecurity. I think there's a number of things in there that are ongoing or marked for revisiting, and I think it includes looking at local providers, working with farms and suppliers, etc. But there's also an action for specifically the scrutiny function to review a community foods opportunities. It says ongoing. I don't know if that's on any of our work plans, and therefore I don't know if it is ongoing. But again, like the letters, if it's coming to scrutiny, either does or doesn't.
Yeah, I think on that one there was a task and finish group that did start, but hasn't yet concluded, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, if that comes back to scrutiny at some point, it would be ideal.
Yeah, it should still be on the programme for that scrutiny committee. Just briefly on the customer service, customer experience point, that we have an item on our work plan, which is customer experience, which we're being told not yet, but soon. And I'm slightly losing patience, but hopefully that will come to us sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking on that one. We just looked at the numbers in the annex of the previous item. Yeah. It has a lot about the customer's experience, but our staff's experience, and it should be something our committee looks at is what's the experience of our desk agents. Yeah. Page 86 has air quality stuff in there. The last two on there talk about executive or political assistance should be lobbying. Again, is that a letter that we close off? Is it dealt with by the local plan that's just been passed? When does it end? There's a lot of these that when does it end? So it'd be good to get a decision on what the completion criteria are. And then ditto for page 87, which actually is the opposite way around. They're marked as completed, but publicly call for the lowering of bus fares, and the action says completed, £2 has been continued to the end of 2024. Doesn't feel very completed to me in the current climate. And then at the bottom, it also has publicly call for the municipal ownership of buses to be actively considered and lessons learned from the experience of other cities in order to lower prices and improve service provision, especially for nighttime and off-peak services. Now, it doesn't say ask the government to give us the rights, because that would be closed off because we now have the rights through mayoral. So actually, I would argue that that is still an active, open action for us to lobby the combined authority. Again, when do we close things off is a question.
I think with many of these, we can only look at them to my mind, in the context of what did we know at the time. You could carry on rewriting them, say, well, things have moved on, so the action has now morphed into lobbying the combined authority, which now has the powers and responsibilities. But we can't. I think with a lot of these, and it's probably something that Chair and myself and the Vice Chair need to go through and have a look and think, well, we've done what was envisaged at the time. We're not going to rewrite it for kind of a changed world. That can be a separate piece of work that a scrutiny committee can pick up. Otherwise, we'd never close any of them.
I agree. I think the lesson to learn from this many years of backlog of open actions is when new motions come through, we should sit down at the beginning and say, what does success look like? And put that in the action is this will be completed when, and then we can close it off without having to have a conversation about it. And some of them are ongoing things. We have a stance as a council of X, and they shouldn't drop off because it's more than 3 years ago. We're looking at White Ribbon recently. We have a motion supporting it. So we should be making sure that sort of is still present and hanging about. And there are some pages on the website that refer to it, but a lot of things drop off that I think are still live just because time's elapsed, and that doesn't necessarily make sense. But I agree with the points you make. I just wanted to flag those specifically.
No. It's this is kind of an evolving picture where hopefully we can get to a point where we're not having to talk about things from 2022, but we can sort of draw a line and try and move on and do it, be better in future. Councillor Waller, you had and I've got Councillor Bassey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Certainly, ultimately, used to be the responsibility of the leader to make sure that full council, being sovereign body of the council, that the actions were followed through. Not to speak from personal experience, but head of Mr. Secretariat would say this hasn't happened. What's happened to this letter? And that was the way in which things were signed off.
Okay. Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I am concerned about the issue of highway maintenance that was mentioned earlier on. This concerns me greatly, and I want to make sure everyone knows, in case there are people who don't know the detail of this. The review of the Highway Safety Inspection Manual, that informs what parts of the road get fixed. And when I had problems in my ward, I learnt to my cost what that actually meant. And it means, for example, that the current manual, which we're told hasn't been fixed 20 months later, takes no account of cycling or public transport when it looks at whether a road needs repairing. It concerns itself only with potholes and not with extended sequences of broken road surfaces. There are a whole variety of things that when I was trying to get the B1228 that goes past Elvington Airfield fixed, which was basically like a ploughed field, I was told repeatedly, I'm sorry, the manual doesn't allow us to do that.
Which page are we on? Sorry.
So it's page 81. Sorry, so the fact that this hasn't been fixed 20 months later really bugs me, because officers were very clear it needed doing. Council made it very clear it wanted it doing. And here we are in the same situation. I'm glad that actually the administration listened and the B1228 did get resurfaced, or a part of it got resurfaced. Okay. But this issue remaining 20 months later is unsatisfactory. I'm hugely pleased that officers have produced this report. It is really significant that we're able to see this, because otherwise it would have vanished from view. So thank you for the report, and I hope we can see that actioned.
So there was a suggestion that the report perhaps doesn't reflect the actual situation. I don't know. Just trying to find it. Okay, Councillor Merritt.
Christian's raised one of the ones I wanted to speak at, because there are safety things, and every day that some of the issues continue, there's risks to people and cyclists in particular from the current definition of what needs acting on. Can we suggest that a report goes to EPAT on progress on reviewing the safety manual, outlining when it's going to come?
Yeah. Yep, we can ask that that be added to the the work program.
In terms of other ones, both page 69 and page 97 motions referred to actions which would take place when the local plan was adopted, and it has now been adopted.
Yep.
So I wonder if we could have updates on those two when either us or EPAT in terms of those particular ones.
Yep, shall we can? Thank you.
And page 73. Yes, the customer and corporate management at Scrutiny Committee, and that was delayed while the departmental reorganisation and restructure took place. The restructure, I think, is now complete. Again, could we ask for a progress report on that?
I have.
On the timetable, yeah.
And I did receive a response from Pauline Sutchfield saying it was on her radar. So I don't want to pursue her unduly. So I've made the point. Any other comments? There was only one. Jen has helpfully circulated a paper update. There was just one motion that was missing from the list, and sadly it was my motion. So never mind. And that was the supporting people living with epilepsy, which will be added back in. So we're doing better. There's only one that was missing this time. So that shows we're heading in the right direction. Anything else on motions, Councillor?
Yeah, I can't find the agenda item that, and I'm looking at future agenda and forward plan and back minutes, but there are a lot of committees, so I might have missed it. But I'll take offline trying to find where it's changing to incorporate cycling as part of the road maintenance, etc. Because it definitely exists, whether it's in the future tense or past tense. But I'll circulate to committee when I find a link to it.
Yeah, that'll be good. Thank you. Anything else? on that agenda item? Nope. Okay, we're nearly there. Agenda item 8, work plan. So as things stand in in April, we have just one agenda item. On York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority net zero projects. We last received a report in December 2023, at which we resolved that we would want to monitor progress on those schemes. What I propose to do is, if the chair and vice chair and I consult with Sean Gibbons, to see what that report would look like. If his response is, well, there's, I mean, I know about one of them because it's in my ward and it's still kind of in progress and there's not at the moment an awful lot more to say about it. I don't want to bring everyone together to receive a report where we note things are in train, and we can take the opportunity to perhaps not have that meeting. But if you're happy for the chair and vice chair and I to sort of take a call on that. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, if there is a chance that from annual council onwards, we might have a different set of scrutiny committees, that would be our last committee as the current scrutiny. So I guess if there's any way of getting any of the other unallocated items into next month, then it might be useful before it becomes more complicated to try and get anything allocated. I also was revisiting whether they all do belong to us. I can't spot on any of the scrutinies who actually owns equalities and diversity, and whether it is definitely us. And then ditto for telecoms, that's a bit placey as well. So there might be some reshuffling anyway, but just leaving that with you guys to take offline works for me.
No, that's fine. I mean, if I'm told that the reorganisation of customer services is complete and we can receive a report in April on customer experience, no? Okay, forget that. We do have a meeting on the 12th of May, which is prior to the revolution of scrutiny, where we do have some pre-decision scrutiny on the equalities, diversity and inclusion strategy. So that's coming for pre-decision scrutiny, which is good. And we'll have council motions and petitions coming back. So we're going to have an even more up-to-date list of motions and petitions. Obviously, beyond then, that point we'll see where we are in terms of scrutiny. But we have done a bit of forward planning on the assumption that things would stay broadly similar. And the June meeting was going to be a major projects update. I'm just waiting to hear back from the new director about the scope of future looks at major projects. So we can keep talking about York Central and Castle Gateway and in alternate, but are there other major projects that we need to be looking at? And I'm waiting to hear back from him. July, we've got sort of climate change heavy agenda. September, that's when we're due to talk about the digital switchover, which I keep hearing is being put back and put back and put back. But Roy Grant has said there'll be something to say in September. So we've been trying to slot things in as conversations with officers have evolved. But if it looks as though April, there will just be one item that it may be Sean says, yes, we're at a critical point in terms of determining the next batch of net zero schemes that we might put forward as a council. And we would really appreciate his input. Fine, we'll have that conversation. But we'll just need to take a view. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I hadn't realised there was a May one because it wasn't in the list of dates at the start.
No, it's
That's
not,
my own
sorry.
brain, sorry. But yes, if there's a May one, April's fine. I think September, October, I'm not worried. The dust will have settled on whatever we're doing. I am making an assumption that it makes sense at annual council to pick the new members of committees. So if we're changing over, that's my assumption of when we'll change over. But for example, if any of those community action, the climate actions can be brought forward if they're June, July-ish, or if we can bring forward major projects as a conversation of what we would like to see in general in the future, then I think that can go into May.
Yeah, no, I've asked the question of the new corporate director and hope to receive a response. Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. If we can't bring anything forward into the April, so it is only just a single item, given our whole tenure of the conversation we had previously, can we move that to May? Because May doesn't seem to be a particularly full agenda either, and just cancel the meeting.
Yeah, happy to do that if that's where we end up. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just encourage the committee to keep your eye on the digital switchover. And just give you a personal experience. I made the switch in my community to digital from the analog landline. It took 3 months to get a new landline working, the VoIP landline working. Doesn't matter to me hugely, I've got a mobile phone, but there are vulnerable people out there who are at great risk of being cut off completely in this process. And the full council voted on this. I just urge everyone to keep on this one and not let it drift. There are lots of questions that need answering.
Thank you. No, and we'll make sure on however scrutiny is constructed. Yes, that's the right word. We'll make sure that doesn't fall off. Okay. There's probably not a lot more to say about future work planning given the potential state of flux, which is fine. So there's no urgent business. So at 8:25, thank you for your time and your participation, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.